Welcome back to Courage and Purpose. I'm your host, Diana Ordonez. In today's episode, I'm joined by Nora Neus, who is an Emmy-nominated journalist, author, and founder of Longform Lab Media Group. Nora's career has spanned everything from war zones to daily breaking news to award-winning books, as well as purpose-driven storytelling. Behind all the accolades is a powerful journey of navigating burnout, trauma, and choosing alignment over achievement. We talk about what it's like to be under prolonged amounts of stress and having the courage to walk away from something that no longer fits. Whether you are a team leader, a company leader, or leading a cause, this conversation is going to remind us that having empathy, boundaries, and human-centered purpose is essential and needed to have sustainable leadership. We're going to go deep on this episode, so let's dive right in. Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well-being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high-performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and reach-based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Welcome back, everybody, to Courage and Purpose. I'm joined today by author and Emmy-nominated journalist, Nora Neus. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's incredible how life will bring two people together at unexpected times. It's been maybe over 3 years since we last spoke. The first time Nora and I ever had a conversation was for a piece that Nora was writing. I had recently joined a young COVID widows group. The person that was leading that group was actually living in my town. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have heard of it. I always say everything happens for a reason. I recently learned of an application that brought COVID-related memories to mind, and I wanted to help them. I reached out to Nora. Maybe she could help this company. That led to a whole other conversation. I learned all about Nora's journey since being top at CNN. This is such a great example of someone that pursued their dreams, got to the height of their career, and then decided to do something different, following their calling and purpose. And so I'm excited to have you on to talk about the incredible journey you've been on and just to share your insights. And you're such a great storyteller.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I love that you're getting an opportunity to share with our audience. And I wanted to give that introduction because one of the things that really felt great through the process of doing the CNN piece was the care that you took during that communication. It's a highly sensitive piece. Obviously, we were all experiencing very profound loss, and you talk a lot about being trauma informed as a journalist. And so just to paint the picture for our listeners, what did that career as a journalist look like, and what drew you to it from such an early age?
Yeah, it's fun. I often don't get to speak to people after their stories. You and I and the other widows in this piece had what I think was such a genuine connection in a moment that you all were going through something devastating less than a year after Juan's passing in your case. And then I disappear off into the ether and never speak again. And so it's nice when people reach back out and we can have a relationship. I have a relationship with quite a few people that I've done stories with in the past. I always wanted to be a journalist before I really knew what that meant and what that word was. As a young kid, I was always, they called me Nosy Nora in elementary school. I always wanted to know what was going on, what the news was, what people were talking about. I always wanted to be in the know. I was in elementary school and my little brother was messing with me at a family dinner. We were having some barbecue and he started throwing kernels of corn at me. I remember this moment so clearly because it kind of informed the rest of my life. He was throwing kernels of corn at me, and I was trying to get the adults' attention, and no one was listening to me. My parents were talking to the other adults, they didn't care. And I finally marched off, and we had a family desktop computer in the computer room. It's the early 2000s. Sat down, decided I was going to write a newspaper. My last name is Neus. So I called it Neus News. And I wrote a newspaper on Microsoft Word, whatever edition was out in 2003 or whatever. And the headline was Local Boy Throws Corn at Sister. I printed out a dozen copies on our home printer, marched back into the barbecue and started handing them out. And then everybody paid attention. Then everyone was really listening. And then my little brother, Jack, who to this day denies this happened, denied that he was throwing corn at me. I don't know how even handed my journalism was at the time. The way I remember it, he was throwing corn at me. That was the headline. You still have that newspaper. My parents still have it in their house. Local boy throws corn at sister. That's how I decided to become a journalist. I started making a little newspaper with my friends on the playground. I decided I was going to start a magazine on the playground. I interviewed some of the teachers at school. And once I got into middle school and high school, I did school paper, and it all just grew organically from there.
I love that. I love how it was such a early memory that you have, and you saw the news actually makes a difference. It makes an impact.
It was a very specific case study.
I love that. The title was genuine. Even then, you could see your creativity behind it.
I was lucky to be raised in a home where the news was really important. Every night when my mom cooked dinner, she watched the news. My mom was a journalist before she had kids. So I never saw that side of her. And yet she brought that to us as kids always. Reading the newspaper was important in our house, and watching the news. It wasn't a totally foreign concept.
Well, it makes sense. So tell me then, when you talk about, okay, you're dropped into a moment in time, and then it's almost like you disappear into the ether after making these profound connections. What would you say were some of the real profoundly impacting moments in your career? Talk about some of those moments once you became a journalist.
There were so many, and I think that's this fire hose effect of working within the daily news world. Whether as a reporter in my first job in local news in Charlottesville, Virginia, I was the 20-year-old on the street corner with a mic just talking about whatever had happened that day, or in the daily news cycle producing in CNN. And it's just like every day there's something. And some weeks it feels like every hour something else. There are still people I think back to in my local reporting and certain stories in local news that stick with me. But the biggest story, massive international story, was when I was working for Anderson Cooper at CNN. I had just moved from Charlottesville. We had been covering the Syrian civil war. We had been covering the refugee crisis. We had been covering the increased attacks by the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, on civilians. And I stumbled across these videos of this young Syrian boy who at the time was about 15 years old. And he was taking selfie videos inside rebel held Syria, so inside the rebellious area that was fighting for freedom. And this was an area being attacked by Assad and the regime. We, as journalists, were having a really hard time getting news out of. It was hard to get crews there. It was hard to get reporters there. It was so dangerous. They were under constant bombardment. But then here was this kid taking selfie videos of himself on the roof of a building. Oh, look, here we have a bombing happening right now. He would sign off his videos in this fake adult reporter voice. And he would say, Mohammed Najem, Eastern Ghouta, Syria, which is where he's from. And there was something about it that was just incredible reporting from an area that we weren't getting to see otherwise. But there's something about it that reminded me of me so much as a young person. I pitched a story about him, and CNN ran with it. I ended up writing, reporting, and video editing, putting together this whole multimedia package on Muhammad's story. And there's a lot more. This is the shortened version of the story, but essentially he was calling out the dictator, and the dictator wasn't too happy about that. The story got posted and it went viral, millions of views. It was translated into Arabic and re-released around the Arab world, and then re-released within Syria on rebel media channels. Muhammad overnight became a celebrity. People on the street were stopping him. Everybody knew who he was locally. And it was an international story. Essentially, what happened is he and his family were targeted in an airstrike by the Syrian regime in retaliation for speaking out against the dictator. And so his community came under extreme bombardment, which had already been happening, but now it was targeted on his block. He and his family were buried alive. And he survived. He and most of his family survived. They were able to claw their way out from underneath the rubble and eventually managed to leave the area for northern Syria, which was slightly more peaceful, and then leave there for Turkey. And then years and years and years later, because the asylum process is horrible, ended up living in France, which is where they are now. The day after this all happens, I'm told, okay, next story, goodbye. And I wasn't supposed to stay in touch with them. The vibe I got from people was that it was wrong to stay in touch, that I should just let it go. But at the time I was working for Anderson Cooper, and he and his team are the most compassionate journalists out there. He and his team have always talked about maintaining relationships and being a good person above necessarily just a story. My immediate circle at the network definitely was encouraging me to be a human and check up on his kid and his family. He has an older brother and an older sister who are just about my age. 8 years later, the three of them are like my siblings. He calls me his sister. He is my little brother. I've gone and visited them. We helped them with their asylum claim, and it ended up also being the topic of my first book, the story of Muhammad.
Yeah, that absolutely sounds like it left an impact. It was your first book. You had this like commitment to helping him. You had such an emotional connection with him that you would call him a brother. I can see how that was a profound moment in your career where your career was telling you one thing, but your heart and your humanity was telling you something different. How did that impact your relationship with your position in your career? There was an internal battle of what was being told to you was the right thing from you were working versus what you knew was right for you with yourself.
Part of it was that my immediate circle was very focused on ethical, trauma informed journalism. And we were covering so many horrible things. Our bread and butter for the years that I was at were mass shootings, hurricanes, these horrible attacks, all leading up to COVID, the biggest mass death event in our country in recent time. Not to mention all that happening during the Trump administration, the first one. I was lucky that I was surrounded by a good group of people. But also, I firmly believe that being a good person or treating someone how you want to be treated or seeing the humanity of somebody else actually produces better journalism. It's not that I'm choosing people over journalism. I'm choosing to be nice to someone and letting go of the story. I wonder if you felt this in our experience. So to back up even further from you, my boss said, hey, I want to do a story about all these young women who are losing their husbands. There's these COVID widows. Go find some, convince them to want to go on CNN and talk about their loss and make sure their schedules are coordinated and then get them all on a Zoom and we'll interview them. And it was a good idea. But then all of a sudden it's me at a desk in a completely empty newsroom wearing a mask in the height of the COVID pandemic, looking for COVID widows who are willing to talk. And that process is known as booking. And booking is an art and a science, and it's incredibly hard. You can approach it very hardcore, like you should do this interview, and if you don't, maybe you'll regret it someday. I think my pitch to you is like, here's an opportunity that you can take or leave, and I'm not going to tell you what decision to make. I think it'd be really great to share your story to help other people and show other people that there is this community of other COVID widows, these young women who are going through this. And it's this Facebook support group that you all had formed to talk about Juan and who he is and the fact that he's not let's not talk around it. Who was he? What kind of dad was he? What kind of husband was he? And let's let his memory live on a little bit more as well. Seeing someone there and meeting someone in that space, I think ends up producing better journalism. I might lose some more interviews than other people. But if I'm forcing someone to do an interview they don't want to do, that's not good for anyone ultimately.
I can imagine the variety of different kinds of stories that you probably had to report on had a variety of different dynamics with a variety of different reasons they may want to or not want to agree to an interview.
And there's big differences too, I would say, virtual and in person. Both the serious story was all virtual. I didn't meet them until 2 years later when we decided to write this book together. We were all on Zoom. The whole piece was we still never met in person. Versus situations in a lot of these mass shootings or big stories. Uvalde, Texas comes to mind. The large school shooting there happens. I jump on a plane, drive overnight, and then I'm there within hours of it happening, looking at people face to face and walking through town, trying to find food, all of those little things that both make some parts of it easier, but some parts of it harder too.
What you're saying is you take the time to have empathy for the other person's situation. So you place yourself in their situation and what is important to them and what might they be thinking about, and try to first understand what reasons might they have for wanting or not wanting to be interviewed, right? You don't want to end up in an interview with someone that didn't want to be interviewed, because then it makes for better reporting when they've had an experience where they feel seen or understood and they're willingly deciding to share their story.
And yet it's so much more exhausting from the journalist's perspective. And you're holding so much more. If I had gone in your example and just found some COVID widows and slapped them in a Zoom room and let my boss interview them, that would have been one thing. And instead, Pamela, one of the other women in your group, still texts me Christmas card pictures every year. And I still think about your daughter growing up without Juan, and like, we'll talk about my career path, but I wonder if I was a different kind of person or a different kind of journalist and I could compartmentalize more, maybe I would have stuck around longer in that daily grind. No regrets, and I wouldn't do it differently, but things do impact you. And I think that's, for me, I want that. I think that's right. I don't want to be a kind of person that could just see that and walk away.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems like news is usually all bad news, right? Nobody is really making headlines on great news. It's usually going to be a tragedy and something to stress about and worry about. I don't even read the news just because I know how much energy is negative around the news. I know that's going to impact me. So I can't imagine looking for the story, writing the story, being in the story, communicating with all the victims, all the people involved. That's got to have such an impact on your nervous system over the years, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
You have all this awareness of how it wore on you over the years. While you were in it, did you have that awareness and ways that you coped with it or dealt with it or alleviated some of that?
Yeah.
Continuing on to
it, both continuing on and aware of it. You did have to compartmentalize. I remember the day of the Parkland shooting. We had a big meeting at work. People were upset, and it was Valentine's Day. The day went in a different direction. I was still at Anderson at that point, and one of our bosses in this meeting said, "Everyone take your time to cry. Don't all do it at once because someone needs to be working." Joking, but there's conference rooms to go cry in. I always would go cry in this one conference room. You can go have your couple minutes of crying and then come back and do your job. Our listeners can't see your face, but it's funny seeing your face react with such horror to that. To me, I'm like, wow, how nice of a boss. It was so meaningful. They let us have a couple of minutes off to go cry. You're horrified.
I can't hide anything on my face. And while I tried to tone it down, it is horrific for me to hear, like, go cry for a couple minutes and make sure you come back and do your job afterwards.
My job that day, and I mean, this is a very specific example, but the day of the Parkland shooting, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida, I want to say, I can't remember how many died now. The numbers are hard. No, I think Parkland was 19. Regardless, my job, my like literal job that day was to sit and watch all of the incoming feeds of helicopter footage, local news footage, on the ground cameras and cut out anything that was too graphic. Here's the school. Great. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. We can show this. We can show this. Oh, there's a stretcher coming out with a bloody child. Oh, got to cut that out. Okay. And then we can pick it back up here. The bloody child is out of sight. But I'm 24
Yeah.
and seeing that. Someone's got to do it. I mean, that was my job. That's a lot. The crying in the conference room happened for sure, often.
Hopefully more than 2 minutes that day.
Yes.
We had a coworker die suddenly of natural causes in her home and didn't show up to work the next day. Somebody reached out to the family like, hey, she didn't report to work. That's not usual. And then finding out that we have a funeral to go to. And that's a completely normal thing. I was only 22 at the time. I didn't go to work the next day. It was just, oh my God, I just spoke to this woman every day for the past couple of years, and now she's just gone in a box. It was the first experience I ever had with death with someone close to me, and it just shocked my nervous system, like, what is happening? And I can't imagine watching children all bloody. There's a difference in something that happened at no fault of anyone's to seeing things that are coming out of, dark places. These are dark things that are happening to children, to top it off. And to work through that and continue to expose yourself to that is hard. It sounds like your only outlet was just when you could to fit in some tears, right?
Yeah, and writing. Writing was always my outlet. And part of that was the actual journalism of it, and part of it was creative writing. In so many cases, feeling powerless can be really dangerous. And I think for me personally, I have a job to do and I'm going to help the country understand. In Uvalde, I interviewed this little girl who was in the classroom where all her friends were killed. We can talk more about that because that's the other moment that sticks with me from my career. But that was the other story of mine that went viral and led the day and was on the news all day. And then a couple days later, President Biden told the story of my reporting in his national address on guns. I don't want to get too graphic, but there were a couple of details of her story that were very graphic, but people latched onto as how bad it can get in those classrooms when you're the survivor. Obviously, we still have a problem with gun control in this country, but those stories need to be told. And that's why she did the interview. That's why this 11-year-old girl, less than 24 hours after seeing this, wanted to sit down with me and tell me what happened in that classroom. And she was like, people have to know this is what it's like. This is what happens. I'm 11 and I'm terrified to ever go back to school. And to be fair, she still hasn't because she's terrified. That's another example of I left. And that was a little different. That was so traumatizing that my team gave me a week off of work. And I had some actual healing time after that because that was on another level. Then I was supposed to just leave and never talk to her again. And this was around the same time that I went to Ukraine at the beginning of the war. So I was in Ukraine, in wartime Ukraine. And this was only a couple months apart. And so the compounding effect of that and Uvalde is why I decided to take a couple days off work. And it was around that time also when the Muhammad book was about to come out. And so I got engaged, I got married, and the Muhammad book came out, and now I was an author. And I made this massive life decision to leave CNN, start writing for myself and freelance writing. And part of that was wanting to go deeper than just the daily news cycle. One of my first big stories when I went freelance is I got on a plane and went back to Uvalde. And this is a couple months after, almost a year after. And I went and spent time with this little girl in her bedroom with her cousin doing her hair and got to spend time with her family. And I ended up writing a massive story that was 3,000 or 4,000 words long for Politico magazine about 1 year later, basically. And so it's not that I left journalism, and I still am a journalist and I'm still reporting those stories, but it's being able to go deeper and have a larger relationship and not just do the day of, which that has a place and people need to do that. And I'm grateful for daily journalists. Being a daily news reporter was the hardest job I've ever had to this day. But I'm grateful that I've been able to step away from the daily grind in the same way.
Yeah, it left an impact on you. I want you to tell the other story also. I'm curious as to how you took that with you. But it also sounds like you have a call to be able to have that deeper story, not just in the moment and disappear. Like you feel that call really have relationship with the fact that these are serious topics and your humanity doesn't let you part ways that easily. You want to have a deeper relationship.
The other side of that is also having boundaries, and that's something I've had to
Yeah.
learn also as a slightly older person and as a slightly older journalist. Boundaries are also there for a reason. I can't adopt every story that I do and try to like muscle away and fix it. Sometimes that's just not my role. Sometimes my role is to report the story and then take a step back. And that is also important. I think the thing with the Muhammad story is just that it was kind of literally my fault. I felt responsible to him and his family in a way that will never go away. Yeah,
Well,
the boundary piece of it is there too.
I remember you mentioning that it came with a loss for them, not just the
Yeah,
experience
their
of
uncle
being
was killed.
right.
Yeah.
And like obviously it wasn't your fault, right?
It was a bombing by an evil dictator who has since been
Right.
deposed.
Right. I hear you saying this story drew attention to someone vulnerable, and I wrote that story. Just as the story gained attention that created benefit for the news station, now you felt also that they can benefit from help.
The idea of agency is something I feel strongly about. When I'm reporting the story for CNN, I am the reporter, they are the subject, and there's a headline of the story, and it's by Nora Neus, and it's about Muhammad. When it came time to write a book about Muhammad's life and his story, there was a point where I could have just written it myself about him, which is how you're supposed to do it. A nonfiction author should be impartial. And if you're going to write a book about a politician, then you're not asking the politician what he wants to be in the book. Muhammad's not a politician, he's a child. Now he's not, and he likes to remind me he is no longer a child. He is in his early 20s and is an adult. But at the time, he was 18, 19 when we were writing the book and putting the book together. And we made the decision that we were going to write the book together. And a dual byline. It was going to be by Muhammad Najm and Nora Neus. He was going to have full agency over how he wanted his story to be told. He's not a politician. And that's not what the roles were. I'm a Western white woman who's going to try to write the story of what it's like to be a Syrian refugee. Absolutely not. I am here to amplify his story. Ultimately, it's his story and his life. The money that goes along with that should be going to him. He and his family got all of the profits from the book. That was really important to me also.
Yeah. You make a good point that you're only one person, right? And you have to sometimes report the news and move on. If you had to go back to your younger self and give yourself some guiding light, what would you offer yourself?
I think my younger self needed to hear that it's not on you to solve every problem that you find. The advice that I give publicly is almost exactly the opposite, which is anyone can solve a problem and you don't have to be someone special. And both are true, both go hand in hand. And I think the advice is tailored to whoever I'm talking to at any given moment. The meaning of the Muhammad book, Muhammad's story, is that you have a voice. You can be a kid with a cell phone, but you can share what's happening in your community and make a difference. Shortly after the bombing and his family and everything, there was a ceasefire. They were able to evacuate people from his community, and his community was ultimately saved those who were left. But something good came out of it. I think a common theme between my work is a story of regular people who are trying to make a change or change their world in a big way or in a small way. I left CNN and I have this career now where after the Muhammad book, I've written more children's books. I'm writing some adult books. I'm writing magazine articles. I'm producing a documentary. I'm coming at storytelling from a lot of different directions. And the advice that I get a lot is pick a lane, like pick something and just be really good at it. I love storytelling from all these different mediums and for all different audiences because different stories are best told in different formats. The connective thread for me is I end up gravitating towards stories of regular people who make a hard choice or give something up to help other people and make some kind of an impact. And also, you have to take care of yourself, because if you don't, then you can't give anything else. And
Right.
there's a point actually in Muhammad's story and in the Muhammad book where after he's left Syria, he's thinking about going back because he feels like that was his purpose and he's lost his purpose. He and I have talked about the similarities in those moments. There has to be a balance, and having a martyr complex is also not going to fix anything. It's a hard balance. It'd be way easier if it was black and white, but I think it's important to take care of yourself and to take care of the world around you.
Yeah. I heard you can change the world, you can solve any problem, but don't try to carry all of it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, have possibility in your mind that if you feel called to make a change, to know that it's possible, but not to carry the weight of all the problems on yourself, right?
And that's the thing with watching the news. I don't think you're required to sit down and consume every horrible thing that's happening. What I think is required of you is to care and be engaged. Maybe you don't know every detail of the most recent budget version for the House of Representatives, but maybe you are deeply involved in your local community's efforts to feed the hungry or whatever it is. Do something.
Yeah. I saw something about someone shared that nervous systems are not equipped to handle all the news of the whole world. Just because it's now possible through the internet and all this technology, we did not evolve fast enough to consume all of
Scientifically.
that. Exactly. When we talk about our body really wasn't made to consume it. And so it's the same for our nervous systems to take in all of that tragedy and suffering going on in the entire world. It's like, that's too much. And I think that's why people started to numb out to cope with the amount of exposure we have to all the
Yeah.
news, right? Our job to hold on to our humanity, the compassion and the service that we have in the way it was originally intended at the local level, where when you see someone that is struggling, that is suffering, that is going through something, to have that compassion, to know that you can make an impact or a difference in some way. It doesn't mean to carry it all from the whole world, but to hold on to that humanity.
Yeah. I think about that a lot in terms of doing what you can with who you are and what you're bringing to the table and working with your interests, not against them, or working with how your brain works, not against it. For me, that is writing and storytelling. That is this career and this path that I've chosen, but that won't be the case for everyone. Some people do it through non-paid work, through their volunteering, their hobbies. Not everyone has to do it the same way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's worked out that I really love writing, and I've been lucky enough to make it work as a professional career. I mean, I was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and one of the most shocking parts for me has been figuring out how my brain works and then just deciding to work with it instead of working against my own brain. So, like, yeah, I do have a million projects going on at any one given time. And yeah, I am at any given time probably writing a kid's book and an adult book and a nonfiction book and a magazine article, because that's how my brain works. And I like having lots of different stuff. And when I get bored of one thing, I go to the other thing. When I get bored of that thing, I go to something else. It's always been true, but I had a lot of shame, or like, oh, you're not supposed to do it that way, or whatever about how you work. And now it's like, no, that's actually my superpower. I love having my hands in a lot of different things. And I do a lot of school visits with my kids' books. It's always fun to tell people, to tell kids, especially, like, well, I have ADHD. And the look on their faces, they're like, well, you write books. What are you talking about? It's like, yeah, I figure out how to work with my brain, not against it. There's a connection that I'm seeing as I'm saying this aloud to also figuring out how you want to show up in the world and working with that, not against that. Not everyone has to be out there. I mean, I think about this a lot with street protests. Not everyone has to be out there in the streets putting themselves in harm's way in the same way that other people do, especially disabled folks and people of color who aren't as safe in the streets necessarily. This comes up a lot in my book about Charlottesville and a white supremacist riot there. We all can do our best in the way that we're meant to.
Yeah, I love that because he talks about honoring all our unique gifts and, yes, using it for service and for the good of people, but in the way that you're uniquely called to do. And so you were gifted with storytelling, and maybe somebody else was able to impact lives with their music. I was just listening to music the other day, and I put on this specific song every time I want to feel a boost. How beautiful is it that this person will never know that has this connection to their work of art, and that they call on it for years and years of their lives, and they'll be doing that maybe even after they're gone, right? It's like that's our legacy, is whatever we were called to create, whatever we were gifted with as our unique talents or skills or abilities or interests, or just like the thing that really calls to us is the way we're meant to impact the world. And so you talk about there's people that are called to protest. There are people that are called to volunteer at soup kitchens, but there's also people that are called to teach dance and be math teachers and change lives through that connection with that child in that way.
And a lot of people who have a job that pays their bills and then are able to be involved in their church community, or are a painter and bring beauty to the world, or like a really freaking good mom, and that's their role, and that's really freaking important.
Everybody is important is the message, and no matter what you're doing,
reached everyone's important.
It's not a low bar, it's a high bar that we aim for, right? We are all meant to change the world from wherever we are. You could easily clock into work to make the paycheck and do 9 to 5 and leave. Or you can say, I'm here for a reason. How do I impact the world around me today? Maybe it is that you're a mentor to the people on your staff. Maybe it is that you show your coworker unconditional love for the first time in their lives and are able to see them and hear them. And, you know, I think about my boss who made a more profound impact on my life than a lot of people did, just because he was able to meet me with compassion and see me and hear me and help me see myself, right? And so you could do anything. My late husband was in IT, and he would just make people laugh. I had a friend that after one passed, he said he called me from the Starbucks the day before he got sick. I just remember walking away from that exchange thinking, I need to spend more time with Juan, because he knew how to make you feel good, make you feel seen, make you feel joyful again, no matter what kind of day you were having. And I think in some ways a high bar for ourselves to know, hey, I'm important and I can change the world no matter what space I'm in, because it's easier to just clock in and out and go through the motions. You say it's a low bar. I feel like there was some pain in that too. What came up for you?
Like, how radical is it that we're sitting here on a podcast and saying, yes, everyone matters. Of course, everyone should matter. That doesn't need to be said. But I do think in this world that we're living, that's not always honored and respected.
Yeah, with all the stuff that is happening in today's world, I can totally see how that could hit hard, right?
Yeah.
But I meant it like how we see our role should be, I can make a difference. And the pain you're touching on is how some people are being treated like they don't matter. In the news, you get exposed to a lot of those experiences where people are treated like they don't matter. Policies are created like they don't matter. Shootings happen like they don't matter. Violent things happen like they don't matter. And I want to circle back to that interview you did, because it sounds like it left a profound impact on you. I can't imagine what an 11-year-old felt when someone could so easily walk into a building and take the lives of all her best friends, all her classmates. I'm sure that felt like they didn't matter, right?
That was a real example. I was still at CNN and able to do the reporting because of CNN. I was there as a producer. I worked for an anchor who was normally on TV and did the interviews. And part of my job was booking interviews for him. One of our bookers back at our headquarters in New York had found this little girl. The next morning, we were supposed to interview her. As we were about to go to the interview, I called to confirm. And the mom, this was like less than 24 hours later. This is the very next morning. And the mom said she doesn't want to do the interview anymore. And I said, okay, of course, that makes a lot of sense. Are you guys okay? Can I do anything? And she said, no, we're not okay. Mia's just terrified of men and really scared of the cameras and the big black equipment because of the gun. And she's like, yeah, I'm so sorry. She really wanted to do the interview, but is freaked out at the idea of like, strangers and men coming into the house and stuff. I said, well, totally up to you. But if she wants to talk to somebody, like, I'll come over. Just me. I'm a young woman. We don't have to do camera. I don't even have to report it. But if she just wants to feel like someone's listening to her story, like my only plan today just got canceled by you. So I'm happy to just come over. And it was because CNN gave me that, like, they were like, this may never go on TV. My boss was supportive of me doing it anyway. So I went and did the interview off camera, just me. And she had a Lilo and Stitch blanket, a fuzzy, fleecy blanket that she kept holding around herself. She was clearly in shock. We sat together and she recounted exactly what happened in excruciating detail. She wanted me to report it because she wanted people to know what it was in the classroom, what happened, that her teacher had tried to save them, all of these little details. That was, I had an incredible boss, John Berman, who's one of the top anchors at CNN, who came out after that interview. I told him what happened, and he said, okay, I'll interview you. We'll just put you on TV and talk about what happened. If she wants to have her story out there, we will put her story out there. And we did, and that next morning, and then the whole next day, the story was everywhere. Though she didn't have any profound takeaway, less than 24 hours after, she just kept saying, I want people to know.
What did she want people to know?
That the grown-ups hadn't protected them. That the grown-ups hadn't done enough. And her teacher was killed protecting a student. I wasn't upset with her own teacher, but she meant grown-ups in this country, grown-ups in our town or community. In Uvalde specifically, the police department really handled things poorly. And there's this whole kind of aftermath of the story that's beyond the point, except that I think it's interesting. She was eventually rescued. She was left in the classroom with the bodies of her friends for a while. They took the survivors on a school bus to the hospital. As she was running from the school to the school bus, her mom and dad had showed up outside the school. She tried to hug them, and they think it was the police, but we're not really clear on who it was, wouldn't let her hug her parents because there was still an active scene and all the kids were supposed to get on the bus, and they forced all the kids on the bus and they were screaming out the window wanting comfort, and then they took them away. And that's not how it should go. And best practices for school shootings, unfortunately, like there are best practices because they happen so much. And I'm laughing just because it's like ridiculous that we're here. But it's all those little details, and some of those details stay with me. And with her too. I mean, that's some of the trauma of that day. Adults really did fail them that day. And the adults in the country have failed the children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The whole time you were telling that, I was like, wow, that's only a year older than my daughter. And I kept thinking, like, what if it happened to my daughter? And
Oh my
then
gosh.
you used her name, and it was just shocking. I can't imagine, to top it off, to see your parent right there and to need them and to not be able to be comforted by them is just, yeah, we failed those kids at so many different points. I know you said that was one of the things that piled on, right? That led to you deciding that you needed to go in a different direction. You mentioned that even in life you were now married, and so you had different vision of what your day-to-day would look like, because it sounds like you were traveling a lot, you were working long hours and things like that, and that no longer fit in for you. And a lot of times when we hit burnout, we step back and reevaluate, especially when you're exposed to tragedies like that too. It does make you question, am I still doing everything that is in alignment with how I set out to live my life? And I'm wondering, because now you help people tell their stories and wrote a book that inspires young journalists to pursue that passion. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you say would make it so that reporting is still making the impact it needs to have in telling the stories that they need to tell, but also honoring humanity and honoring that people can only take on so much? So, what would you say would have been the thing that made it right?
What you're getting at.
Yeah. For those that are aspiring to be journalists, what would you say to them?
I think it comes down to people and prioritizing their voices. It is hard to have a representative set of voices on your newscast, especially if your station or paper historically has not served marginalized communities well. It is easier to tell a crime story by interviewing a police officer, showing some surveillance video, putting up a stat about what number of robbery this is this year, maybe having a quote from a bystander or victim, and then calling it a day. It is much harder to report on systemic economic inequality in our community, why robberies are increasing, what the root sources of crime are, where these folks go when they're arrested, the state of prisons in our community, and what work needs to be done within our news station to talk about how we're representing often communities of color with respect to robberies and what crimes are we covering? Is it, white victims? Those don't get asked when there isn't time and money to do so, which isn't anyone's fault often. Like, isn't like the individual reporter's fault or the producer's fault. I think ultimately a lot of it comes down to local news and time and money and being able to invest in those relationships and invest time in building up those relationships. There's so many good nonprofit newsrooms right now that are doing that work. That's both local and national. The model of a nonprofit newsroom is donor supported, not advertiser supported. And these groups and outlets are able to actually build up those communities and try to heal past harms between local news and certain communities and put time and effort and money into building up some of those relationships, but also those young reporters, which goes from local all the way up through national. The reason that Uvalde story was able to happen the way that it did is because my bosses, and at that point we were working for one of the top shows at the network. We had just spent a ton of money getting our crew to Texas in a matter of hours. We knew we had 20 people on the ground. When CNN shows up to a national tragedy, it's wild. It's like a small city. We have support staff, multiple vans. It was crazy. I forgot deodorant, and there was what you call a runner to go to run to the local store and buy deodorant for me and bring it back. You're staffed when you're working for a national agency like CNN. And it's not always the case, but you have resources. Comparing that to when I was in local news and I was by myself, brushing my hair, interviewing a murder suspect, but then also trying to set up the satellite, but then also trying to broadcast the news. No one in that circumstance is interviewing a little kid just to kind of humor her. That might end up being a story or might not. Or asking about the implications on the lower income community of our town. Because you don't have time. Those questions are still being asked. But the magic wand is funding for local news and the ability to prioritize things other than clicks and ads.
The funding part is also challenging because you start to wonder about the partialness of the news, right? Where does the funding come from? And does that make the news impartial? Do they not report or report on certain things because that's where funding comes from?
Then what is impartiality? What is objectivity? The news has said to be objective, but that's just been the perspective of old white men in power. We all are coming from somewhere. No one is truly objective. We're all coming to this with our own lived experiences. And then on the other side, you have Fox, who is pushing a political agenda and it's the propaganda arm of a major Republican party. I mean, that's crazy also. So there's extremes and there's balance that's needed. I don't have any answers on how to fix the state of journalism in America right now. But it all comes back to people and stories and being able to listen and respect people and their voices and their own agency in telling stories.
Yeah, I think what's really made a difference in the way journalism happens and the way news spreads these days. And you saw it yourself, even with the boy in Syria, just using a cell phone and reporting on bombings. And now there's so much agency about telling your own story, right? You don't need a news station. You just put it on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, and suddenly you can get eyes on it from all over the world. The beauty of the internet is anybody could be a reporter, right?
Like, and then you have questions about accuracy and all of that too.
And it sounds like what made a difference for you is you had a team that valued people, right? And so I think that one of the messages to an up and coming is how important that is, to make sure you have that kind of a team. And I think a lot of the issues you're talking about in journalism are issues in corporate America or in any career, right? It's time and money is what drives whether or not you start to get treated like not a human.
Sure.
Reason why a lot of the younger generations are taking on entrepreneurship, right? They're trying to decide for themselves how they want their careers to go. And now you're a freelancer yourself and have your own business also. When I decided to have my own business, it was from that burnt out place where I was like, I didn't want to ask for permission anymore. For just like my daughter early because she was sick. And yeah, some aspect of that is I wasn't good at the boundary setting. I allowed that to impact me more than it probably could have if I had firmer boundaries around my time and things like that and how I let that impact me. But at the same time, you pick up on energy. You knew you were safe with this group of people to respond in this way. And then with this other group of reporters, it wasn't safe, right? And stopped wanting to make those decisions feel less mine.
A lot of sense. I think that's for me going forward. Maybe I will go back staff somewhere in-house someday, and I'm opposed to that. But being able to write and have control over more phases of the process of my work has been really meaningful.
Yeah. And maybe hearing you speak about it for those in journalism, you said it's powerful to tell your story. Ideally, you could influence people doing reporting for the sake of changing the world as opposed to just eyes and attention and goal setting. And it's about reconnecting with that and to know that you don't have to conform to what seems to be the popular opinion, that if you have that inner voice that's telling you to care and follow through, it's okay when there's nothing wrong with it. Because I think so much of our trauma and our reasons that we find ourselves burnt out too is a lot of shame and what we should be doing or not doing.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So some of what I hear you saying is to just like be true to yourself, listen to what you're called to, listen to when you are moved to help, and then keeping that balance, because you find yourself almost on either ends of that. But I think it's because what you noticed is if you try to carry everything, you end up not caring for yourself, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have all the answers. You and I are both still young, and we'll see where my career and where life takes me, but you're not guaranteed time. And I want to be doing something good now.
Yeah. I love that we're hitting on that conclusion too. Yeah, if there is that inner voice telling you, if there's no time like the present to honor it, if you say tomorrow, tomorrow may never come. One of the reasons I made that change was because my husband's two best friends died suddenly. It was like, what am I really doing here? Is it really in alignment with me? If it had been me, would I be happy about how I've spent the last few years? Or are there things I still haven't gotten a chance to experience, prioritize, etc.?
Absolutely.
I honor you so much for having this conversation with me. And I love all the topics that we hit on. One of the things that we talked about is working with your talents, with your quirks, with your differences, the things that make you you rather than against them, coming out of that shame cycle and deciding what you should be doing, not doing. Before we wrap up, I know I opened up with, I'm going to ask you about this, and I never got to it, but it sounded like you got to a peak of your career. You had an Emmy nomination. What did that feel like? Was that validating for you? Was that an accolade that you strived for in any way? I'm curious.
I don't know that this is a helpful answer. Not really. Of course, it's nice to have the validation. And I think the best part about it is that it's opened up doors for me to do more of what I want. That's really helpful. Awards are kind of fake in a way. The big institutions that put up their projects and then judges of your peers voting on whatever the big organizations. If you're a small indie station from somewhere, you're probably not winning an Emmy. I'm incredibly grateful to have been nominated. I wanted to win and I was bummed when we didn't. If you stay at CNN long enough, you'll get an Emmy eventually. Kind of part of the problem. It is a little inside baseball for the industry at some point. I'm grateful for it. And I was super excited. My website says I'm an Emmy nominated reporter, and it does matter in career ways, but it says very little about my overall career in reporting. It was for one story I did. Isn't even any of the ones we've talked about. All kind of a crapshoot. And that's not the validation I'm chasing, you know?
So when we talked about what were the stories that really stayed with you and made an impact on you, would you have even put that story on that list?
No, because the story we were nominated for an Emmy for, I was a producer on a series of COVID town halls during the height of COVID. And we did this series of town halls as educational programming for adults. And we decided to do a kids town hall about what is COVID. And then we did another one about race in America. So this is summer of 2020. And we ended up partnering with Sesame Street, which was such a cool experience because you have Elmo and Big Bird talking about what is racism, what is racist, and why are the police killing Black people. Being able to craft those answers for kids and produce that CNN, but like for children, was really was very cool and very meaningful. And also in a lot of ways, I was like, adults need to be watching this. But some of those basic answers is what maybe adults need to hear too. And that has fed into my career producing for children and then producing books for children and taking children seriously in terms of what they can learn and what they can handle. So in that way, that was meaningful and a cool project. One of the funniest things is that Elmo and Big Bird and all of the characters stay in character between takes. That's because normally there's children in the audience. They film Sesame Street with kids in the audience. So they have to stay in character. It's when they cut, if they make a mistake, it's Elmo saying, oops, I messed up my line. We're now all adults. We're in a virtual control room because it's June 2020. I'm burnt out, stressed, living in my parents' house. And I'm on this Zoom. It's Elmo on the Zoom. All you see is Elmo. He's doing his lines, messes something up, talking about what COVID is. He's like, Elmo messed up. Try again. I just remember dying laughing with my friend who was working on it, just being, what is happening? It was so bizarre. And just this moment of, okay, this is a weird career moment where I'm like, hey Elmo, can you say that a little differently? Or hey Elmo. And then the next day probably is when I'm calling you. Not really. A couple months later is when I'm then calling you and doing this horrible, sad story. But I just was like, what's happening with Elmo on Zoom from Elmo's house? It was bizarre. So that's what the Emmy is for. So it was ridiculous. But important and good. And the reason we won the Emmy is because it actually helped kids understand like what was happening.
That's funny.
Won the Emmy nomination.
But that's so powerful too. When we talked earlier about everyone is important, I don't know Elmo's story. The guy who plays Elmo. There's people that are born just wanting to make video games, or maybe somebody was like, what if I created this character for children? No matter what you are called to do, you can help people feel seen and heard and validated and important. Even Elmo, Elmo is changing perspectives, right? Music, the mom teaching her kids how to help others feel important. The teacher, the person that makes your coffee could be making people feel like they're important. I think it's that we don't lose sight of that each one of us has a responsibility. What we are responsible for is to show that we care. I like to think about how we all play an important role and we all are important. And we also can show each individual how they are important for us and highlight those stories. So I can imagine one day you're on Zoom with Elmo, and then the next day you're in a very deep I remember I was in tears in that conversation because it was a platform where I got an opportunity to connect emotionally with the loss. It wasn't somebody who was just reporting on a statistic or an agenda. While I thought it was important that people knew that you could be completely healthy, have a whole family at home, be taking care of yourself, and still lose your life, be aware of that. Take it seriously, but also the fact that Mia got to see her dad on the news felt like, oh, this was not for nothing. He was important. This was important. I thought that I did it for that. And a lot of people reported on us, like more than I ever thought I would get a chance to do. I decided early on if anybody wanted to tell Juan's story, I was going to say yes, even though I had severe social anxiety. I fought my boss tooth and nail just to not do a presentation. Did he ever think I was going to volunteer to be on the news? I got a chance to tell a lot of people parts of his story, but not a lot of people actually showcased it after the interview. And what I appreciated so much about the story with CNN was that we got to emotionally connect with that part, and it was honored and featured as not part of some kind of agenda. Yeah, that was special.
So glad. I was really proud of how that piece came out.
Thank you. I actually met one of my very close friends now because of that piece. My pastor saw it, and she lost her husband shortly after. My pastor asked me to connect her to the group, and it turned out that she also lived in Waldwick. She's one of my best friends now. It was because of that piece.
It's crazy. Someone who saw the Muhammad story about Syria was a composer, an older British man. He saw the story, reached out to Muhammad, and got to know them well. Fast forward 8 years later, yesterday, my parents were in London on a trip, and they got to meet him and have lunch with him. It's just like, wow, little things that you wouldn't expect to come out of some of these stories and connections.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and your interest. It's amazing. I'm so amazed by your storytelling and your questioning and interview skills. You're a journalist.
Oh God, I would never in a million years would have imagined somebody describing me that way. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been an honor. And one of the reasons we reconnected was I've been wanting to write a book for so long. And then you mentioned that's what you do now. I was, well, I guess I'm being pointed in the direction that it's now the time. That's validating too. But I do want to, at some point, tell the stories that shaped me and tell Juan's story. For those that have enjoyed hearing you talk and knowing your passion for storytelling and maybe want to write their book or maybe want you to write a piece, what are some ways that they can connect with you, work with you?
I started this company called the Longform Lab that help people tell their stories, because basically I realized that there's all these people out there like Muhammad who have a story to tell, who don't necessarily have the ability to tell it themselves. The Longform Lab develops stories with co-bylines, but also helps people write their own stories. And so folks hire us to help write their memoirs, hire me to help tell their story, ranging from light edits and help and encouragement all the way through ghostwriting and writing it for them. Longformlab.com is that website. And then I'm at noraneus.com, and on social media, just as Nora Neus.
Thank you so much, Nora. This has been awesome. I can't wait to connect with you more, and hopefully
thank you so much.
Maybe even write that book with you.
Maybe write that book someday.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Till next time, everybody. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.